The echo chamber. Sarah never understood why her grandmother's Victorian house had a phone booth in the basement. It stood in the corner like a forgotten relic, its weathered wood panels darker than the surrounding shadows. The rotary phone inside hadn't worked since the 70s, or so her mother claimed. But on the night of her grandmother's funeral, as Sarah sorted through the inherited house alone, she heard it ring. 3 sharp trills cut through the basement's silence. Sarah froze halfway down the stairs, her flashlight beam fixed on the booth. It couldn't be ringing. The house's electricity had been shut off for weeks, and the phone line was long dead. Yet the sound persisted, echoing off the stone walls. "Must be my phone," she muttered, reaching for her pocket. But her cell phone was silent, its screen dark. The booth rang again, more insistent this time. Sarah's rational mind screamed at her to go back upstairs, but her feet carried her forward. The beam of her flashlight revealed decades of dust coating the booth's exterior, undisturbed except for a single set of fresh fingerprints on the handle. Her grandmother had been bedridden for months before her death. The phone rang once more, and Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the door. It swung open with a creak that seemed to last forever. The ancient rotary phone sat innocently on its shelf, its black surface reflecting her flashlight beam. Ring. Sarah lifted the receiver, pressing it to her ear. Static crackled through the line, then cleared. "Hello?" she whispered. "Sarah, dear." Her grandmother's voice, exactly as it had been before the illness took hold. "I've been waiting for you to answer." Sarah's knees weakened. "This isn't real. You're dead." "Yes, sweetheart. But there are things I need to tell you. Things about the house. About why I kept that booth all these years." The static grew louder, taking on a rhythm like distant whispers. "You see, Sarah, this phone booth, it's not for calling out. It's for receiving calls from the other side. Your grandfather built it in 1962, after we lost your Aunt Mary. We thought we could reach her, but we reached something else instead." Sarah's free hand gripped the booth's frame. "What do you mean?" "The lines between worlds are thin here, dear. This house, it sits on a crossroads of sorts. Not the kind you can see on a map. Mary wasn't the first child we lost, and the grief, well, it made us desperate. Your grandfather found old books, made deals he shouldn't have." The whispers in the static grew clearer. Other voices, dozens of them, speaking words Sarah couldn't quite make out. "Grandmother, I don't understand. The booth connects to everywhere, Sarah, everywhen. But the things that live in the spaces between, they've been waiting, listening, using our grief to inch closer." Her grandmother's voice hardened. "I'm calling to warn you. Burn it, Sarah. Burn the booth. The books in the attic, all of it. Before they find another way through." The other voices suddenly surged, drowning out her grandmother. Sarah could understand them now, and they were calling her name, each one a different pitch, a different time, a different world. "They're coming!" Her grandmother's voice cut through, distant now. "Run, Sarah! Run now!" The receiver grew hot in Sarah's hand. Through the booth's dusty window, she saw shadows moving in the basement darkness, shapes that shouldn't exist, coming closer. The voices reached a crescendo, and Sarah saw hands pressing against the glass. Too many hands, with too many fingers, leaving frost patterns that spelled words in languages that hurt her eyes. She slammed the receiver down and burst out of the booth. As she sprinted up the stairs, the phone began to ring again and again and again. Behind her, wood splintered as something finally broke through. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached her car. Through the house's windows, she could see lights flashing in the basement, shadows dancing. She drove to the nearest gas station, bought a can of gasoline, and returned just before dawn. The phone booth was still ringing as she poured the gasoline, still ringing as she lit the match. The flames caught quickly, and the ringing turned to screams. Not just her grandmother's voice now, but all the voices that had ever called through that line, burning together. By the time the fire department arrived, the basement was a scorched hollow, and the phone booth was ash. Sarah watched from across the street as they contained the blaze, her grandmother's last warning echoing in her mind. That night, she went through the attic and burned every book she found, watching the strange symbols on their spines crumble to nothing. The house stands empty now. Sometimes, late at night, passing teenagers swear they can hear a phone ringing from deep underground. But no one's ever gone to answer it. Sarah made sure of that when she sealed the basement door with concrete and sold the house for a fraction of its worth. She changed her phone number, moved across the country, and never answered calls from unknown numbers again. But sometimes, in her dreams, she hears static on the line and voices calling her name, getting closer with each ring. And sometimes, when she wakes, her phone is off the hook. 3 years after the fire, Sarah thought she'd finally escaped the booth's influence. She'd built a new life in Oregon, teaching high school English and carefully avoiding anything to do with antique phones or Victorian houses. But on the anniversary of her grandmother's death, she received a letter from the current owners of the house. "Dear Ms. Walker," it read, "while renovating the basement, we discovered something unusual beneath the concrete. We believe it belonged to your family, and given the circumstances of your departure, we thought you should know." Attached was a photo that made Sarah's blood freeze. Beneath the shattered concrete floor, partially exposed, stood the charred frame of a phone booth. It should have been ashes. She'd watched it burn. But there it was, its blackened wood somehow intact, and on its door, fresh fingerprints glowed in the camera flash. Sarah recognized them. They matched the ones she'd seen that night, but these were different somehow. Reversed, as if pressed from the inside out. That evening, every phone in her apartment rang simultaneously, including ones she'd never owned. They poured from her closets and drawers, dozens of them, antique rotary phones that leaked from the walls like dark water. And through their combined static, she heard her grandmother's voice, different now, wrong. "Sarah, dear, you didn't burn enough. Some doors once opened can never truly close, and they're all so eager to meet you at Cal." Again. As Sarah fled her apartment, she glimpsed her reflection in a window. Behind her stood the booth, impossibly intact, its door swinging open in welcome. And in its shadows, she saw herself. Still standing there from that first night, eternally answering that first call, trapped in an echo that would never end. They say if you call Sarah Walker's old number now, you'll hear a strange sound, like static. But not quite. And if you listen closely beneath the white noise, you might catch fragments of conversations. A grandmother warning her granddaughter, a young woman screaming, and somewhere a phone booth's door, eternally creaking open. Just make sure to hang up before they start calling back. Because in the spaces between signals, in the dark between dimensions, there are always lines waiting to connect. And once you're part of the conversation, you can never truly leave it behind.